This is video 1 for chapter 10, so it goes along with section 10.1 in your book. And we're going to be looking at outcomes and events. So this is kind of our introduction to statistics and probability in this chapter. So you will need to fill in this target. In this section, we will be identifying and counting the possible outcomes for an event. Okay, so thinking about an event taking place and then what would the possible outcomes be. So that leads right into our vocab. So our first one is experiment. Okay, and in this chapter we're going to talk about experiments in terms of an investigation or a procedure that has varying results. So basically it's when something happens and you could get different outcomes, different results, right? You could flip a coin and get heads or tails. So flipping that coin is an experiment. The next word is event. Event. So we're going to use the word event as just meaning that something's happening, right? You did something, you did the experiment, or you drew a card out of a deck, or you flipped a coin, or you rolled the dice, right? Something happened and there was one or more outcomes, okay? So when they say event in your homework or in this chapter, they just mean, okay, you did the experiment or you did the thing, and then we're going to be looking at the outcomes. So, outcomes, right? Outcomes are the possible results of an experiment. So, if I flip a coin, the possible results are I could get heads or tails. Those are the two different outcomes. So, in this section, we're going to be looking at what are the different outcomes, how many different outcomes are there, and we're going to get into how likely is a certain outcome compared to something else, right? The probability of those different outcomes, all of that in this chapter. And then favorable outcomes, right? So favorable outcomes are the outcomes of a specific thing happening, right? So if I say, when I flip a coin, I could get heads or tails. But if I just want to know when I'll get heads, then heads is the favorable outcome, okay? Or if I'm talking about, drawing a card out of a deck. Well, if I want to see how I could get a red card, then the favorable outcomes would be drawing either a heart or a diamond, right? I should make these red. If I draw a heart or a diamond, those are the ways that I could get a red card, okay? So we'll go through lots of examples, but I want you to have these vocab definitions and things written down to use in this chapter. So here's just some basic examples of experiments, and you can take a second just to jot down a couple words from each of these so that you kind of have an idea what we're talking about, okay? So an example of an experiment, drawing a name out of a hat, or picking a card out of a deck, or choosing a popsicle stick, with your number on it out of a cup, or selecting a piece of candy out of a bag. If you reach in, are you going to get a grape Jolly Rancher or a cherry Jolly Rancher, right? So anything where you are doing something and you could get different results. Those are experiments. So here's the first one. And on your paper, you're going to want to write down that A is flipping a coin, okay? So we talked about this a little bit. Go ahead. There's 4 questions we're going to go through with each of these. So if I'm flipping a coin, how many different outcomes are there? Well, I could get heads or tails. So there are 2 different outcomes, possible outcomes. What are the outcomes? Heads or tails, okay? So notice I counted them and then I listed them. What are the favorable outcomes for landing on heads? Well, the only way I can do that is if I get a head, right? If I flip it and it lands on heads. So if we flipped it 20 times, how many heads would you expect to get? Well, it might not be exactly half of the time, but that's probably what I would expect to get, about 10 out of 20 times. So I'm going to say 10 times, right? There are 2 different outcomes. They're both equally likely. So I would expect to get heads about half the time. All right, let's go on to our next one. So this is experiment B. You can see I have a spinner here. So write down for experiment B that we have a spinner with sections 1 through 10. right? There are 10 different sections on our spinner. So how many possible outcomes? Well, 10. There are 10 different sections I could land on. What are the outcomes? Well, I could land on all the numbers from 1 to 10. So you could list them out, or you could say all the numbers 1 to 10. Okay? Favorable outcomes for landing on an even number. Well, let's look at all the ways we could land on an even number. I could land on 2, 4, 6, 8, or 10. Okay? So when they ask for those favorable outcomes, I'm going to list them. If I land on 2, 4, 6, 8, or 10, those are the ways that I could get an even number. Okay? If we spun 20 times, how many times do you think we would land on the 5? Okay, well, this is just kind of thinking about it. The 5 here is 1 out of 10 sections. Okay, and if I spun my spinner 20 times, I would probably expect to get maybe 2. Get a 5 twice, or 2 times maybe. That's just a guess, right? But that's probably what I would expect if I had to make a guess. If it happens 1 out of 10 times and I do it spin it 20 times, probably twice or around there. Okay, here's experiment C. So experiment C is rolling a dice, or your book calls it a number cube a lot. So this is a cube that's numbered 1 through 6 on each side, okay? So I want you to try this one. You're going to pause and answer how many possible outcomes, what are those outcomes, favorable outcomes for landing on a number greater than 4, and then think about it. If we did it 20 times, how many times do you think you would roll a 1? Okay? So you're going to pause and do C and D. So just finish C and we'll check it, and then we'll go back and do D. Okay, so there are 6 different outcomes. That's my first answer. What are those outcomes, or the possible outcomes? Well, the numbers 1 through 6. Those are the different things you could get when you roll a dice. Favorable outcomes for landing on a number greater than 4 would be if you roll a 5 or if you roll a 6. Okay? And if we rolled 20 times, I would estimate we might get a 1, right? 2 or 3 times. Your answer might be different, right? We could actually do this and see what we come up with, but if we were just estimating or guessing the probability of that, I'd say 2 or 3 times, right? Let's look at D. So D says it's a spinner with 5 different sections. So write that down for our experiment D. And then again, go through these questions and put your answers. Pause while you work it out, and then we'll hit play when you're ready to check. Okay, for this one, we see it's a spinner with 5 different sections. Okay, so 5 possible outcomes. What are the outcomes? Well, red, yellow, green, blue, and orange are the different things you could land on. Favorable outcomes for landing on not red. Well, that would be everything else besides the red. So if I don't want to land on red, I could still land on yellow, green, blue, orange. Right? So I would list those out. There are 4 ways I could land on something other than red. Okay, and then I want to look at this one down here. If I rolled it or spun the spinner 20 times, how many not yellows do we think we would get? Well, let's see. If I go back to my spinner, there are 4 of the 5 sections that are not yellow. So we would expect about 4 out of every 5 times we do it, we get something that's not yellow. Well, I can kind of scale this up. Well, so I would expect 8 out of 10 times I get something that's not yellow, or about 16 out of 20 times I get something that's not yellow. Okay? So again, would it exactly come out to 16 out of every 20 spins you get something not yellow? No, but that's what I would expect, or it should be something probably close to that. Okay, so the next question here says you have a bag filled with 4 red, 3 blue, 3 yellow, and 2 green marbles. Okay, cool. You randomly choose 1 marble from the bag. So you're not looking, you're just reaching in and picking one. And find the number of ways each of these events can occur, and then find the favorable outcomes for that event, okay? So the first one says choosing red. Well, I see that there are 4 red marbles, so there's 4 different ways I could get a red marble. And if I list, right, find those favorable outcomes, that means list them out. The ways I can get a red marble is if I draw the red, the red, the red, or the other red, right? All right, how about choosing green? Well, I'm looking and there are 2 green. So there are 2 ways I can get a green, and that is if I draw the green or the other green, okay? So here I'm listing out the ways it can happen. If there's more than one of those, then I list it, however many times I have a green marble. 2 green marbles, I list it twice. All right, choosing a U of M color. Not that I like U of M, but it fit with the question here. So I know U of M colors are yellow or blue. So let's see. I have 3 yellow and 3 blue. So there are, if I put those together, 6 different ways I could draw a U of M color, right? So if I draw the yellow, the yellow, the yellow, or the blue, blue, or the other blue. If I draw any of those 6 marbles, I'll have a U of M color. All right, choosing purple. Well, I'm reading it again, and I don't see any purple. So there are no ways, 0 ways that you could draw purple, right? That outcome isn't possible. All right, choosing not blue. Well, let's see. 4 red, 3 yellow, and 2 green. That's all the rest of the marbles, so I get 7, 8, 9. There are 9 ways I could pick a marble that's not blue, and that is if I choose, kind of running out of room here, if I choose red, 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 yellow, 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 or green and green. Right? Okay. So just to summarize here, these are the questions you're going to see in this section, okay? If they ask you how many possible outcomes, they want a number, right? They want a number, so you should count. Count them and just put how many there are, all right? If they ask, what are the possible outcomes, right? What are they? Then they want a list. Tell me what they are. Put it in a list. Write them out. If they ask how many favorable outcomes, so like in this example, how many favorable outcomes of landing on yellow? Oh, well, there are 2. They just want a number, right? Count. And tell me how many. And if they ask, what are the favorable outcomes? So if I go back to my same example, what are the favorable outcomes of landing on yellow? Oh, they are if I land on the yellow 2 or the yellow 3, right? So again, here they want a list, okay? So these are the kinds of questions you're going to see in section 10.1. And we're going to build on that, right? These ideas carry through for the rest of the chapter. So it seems like the basics here, but we're going to keep using this for the whole chapter 10.